Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started here. This is a session for Sierra Queries and Create Lists training. I anticipate the training session here is going to last about 45 minutes, depending on questions. And before we get into the actual presentation itself, I'd like to talk a little bit about how the meeting is going to be organized. I am going to mute all of you on the call right now. This just seems to work out better in terms of organization. The way it'll work is we'll have the presentation here. We'll mute all of you, and then at the end of the presentation, if you could send your questions via the chat interface in the lower part of your GoToMeeting console, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you could do that at the end of the presentation, we'll handle questions that way. We are using a training server. This allows us to get more access to areas of Sierra that we would not have access to with our current CountyCat preview mode. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So I just want to let you know that what we're looking at is not our actual database, but does allow us to get further into it than we currently do with our preview mode. The session is being recorded. It'll be available on mcflis.org underneath the continuing education section. You have to log in as staff to see that. Otherwise, it will be available on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and type in McFlis1, that's MCFLS numeral 1, in a search for YouTube, you'll come across our channel, and it has all the videos that we've done so far. The goals for this training are pretty simple. The primary goal is to give you what you need to know to be able to work with Sierra on April 2nd, moving forward, so you can get going as soon as possible. The secondary goal is to give you assurance that most of the functions work in exactly the same way as they do in Millennium. And this is really true for Create Lists and the queries that I'm going to show you. There's a couple of new wrinkles, new features with Sierra that I think you will find interesting, or at least useful for your work. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about the timetable. The staff preview mode started on March 3rd. This preview mode gives us access to Sierra and how it's going to look on April 2nd. I'm hopeful at this point that most of you have at least attempted to log in and make sure that you have access to Sierra. If you haven't done so, please do that as soon as possible, and talk among your staff as well to see if anyone has problems logging into the system. We spent about 2.5 weeks or so getting these logins prepared, but we have over 900 users, so I'm sure that there will probably be some things that we need to change before we go live. But we're pretty confident most everybody's going to be able to at least log in. You're not going to be able to see everything in our preview mode currently. You're not going to be able to make edits to records, send notices, or in our case even create a list. It's more or less a way to look at the data and get comfortable with the interface. One of the questions I'm getting a lot is whether or not our authorizations are set up correctly, because you'll see a lot of prompts for authorizations as you go through the database, like, for example, making edits to records. It's really not anything that's at fault with your authorizations. It's just simply they've locked down the database, so we can't make changes to it. And even things like sending notices you wouldn't think would be affected by this, but they've locked that down as well as create lists. You cannot create a list in preview mode, to my knowledge. So that's why we're looking at it here today. A couple of things I'd like you to check as well in preview mode is your printers. Check to see if your printers are available. If you go to File, select the printer, and then look at your standard printer, for example, in Sierra, they should look identical to what you're using in Millennium. If that's not the case, or you see something there that you need, let us know. One One way you can test your printers, particularly if you're using a regular 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, is to just print off a patron record. You can do that in our preview mode. If you just go to view a patron record, for example, and then print it off and see if that actually does do the trick. Be aware with your printer settings, they may need to change, particularly on the Format tab for local printers. You may want to see if those match up correctly. The other area to check would be under Admin and Settings. There's a lot of areas here, but the two that I'd like you to focus on if you can is the macros area. These are the function keys that are mapped to certain functions like the Go menu. Make sure that those match up, or at least pretty similar to what you're doing with Millennium. Also, the new record templates is another area. Those basically are less critical, but they will basically populate a new record template for your login. So, for example, if you're at Shorewood or Whitefish Bay, they'll have a new record template for example, a new patron record that's set up directly for your library. So you just want to make sure that those match up with what you're doing at Millennium. This is the time to do that type of stuff while we have the ability to make a lot of changes to the settings. April 2nd is our go live date. Still on board for that, so the system will be unavailable for the entire day, similar to January 20th. The offline circ will be available for those of you that use that. On April 2nd, we're asking that you use the Sierra offline circ program. And there's a little bit of perhaps confusion about Sierra Offline. There isn't actually a Sierra Offline program. We're using Millennium Offline, but using just the only change that we're making is a different port number. But we decided to use a different icon and present it differently so that there's less confusion about which version of this that you need to use. You'll need to use Sierra Offline on April 2nd because the port number needs to communicate with the a port on the Sierra database to make the connection so your transactions are uploaded correctly. Okay, so before we get into the bulk of the program on Create Lists, I wanted to just go through some basics about Sierra. So for those of you who haven't had the benefit of seeing this before, you can see what it looks like. I'll minimize my screen here. And since we're logging into a training server out in California, this might be a little bit, take a little bit more time to log in, but it'll be a little bit quicker for us. It seems like it takes about 10 to 12 seconds to log in on our preview mode. That may be different based on your experience and what time of day you're trying to log into. But it's going to be about the same time it takes to log into Millennium at this point. The process for logging in for staff is going to be a little different based on where you're coming from. For most suburban staff, the process is going to be much more simplified. You'll be logging in with your personal staff initials, and that's the only thing that you'll need to log into the system. This means that you won't be using an MC40 or MCAT or MSER generic login first to log in. You'll just be using your staff initials. For the Milwaukee Public Library staff, virtually all of you, unless you're in acquisition, serials, or CCDM, you'll be logging in very similar in a way to the way you've been using Millennium. So that means we have a generic Sierra login that needs to set your location, your printers and templates for the library that you are at, and then you would log in with your staff initials after that. So it's very similar to Millennium. The reason we're doing that is because so many staff rotate between branches within Milwaukee Public Library. We need to be able to do that and allow the staff to rotate. Otherwise, you'd be tied to a specific location each time you logged in, and that wouldn't work with our system. Okay, so we're logged in here. I just wanted to show you one real important thing about logging in, and that's the ability to change your password. If you go to the admin menu up here, this isn't live yet in our preview mode, but I wanted to show you this here in a training server. You can go to admin and change password. So you're no longer going to be using the SSH client or the CountyCat SSH to log in and change your password. You can do that all within the Sierra client, which I think is really going to be a nice thing moving forward after April 2nd. And just a word about the CountyCat SSH, that the old InnoPack client, or the blue screen as we used to call it, that is for the most part going to be going away with Sierra. There are some administrative applications that are part of that SSH client that I will use, but for the most part they're really trying to move everything off of that, and for the vast majority of staff you will not need to use anything that's in there. That's whatever's left is going to be available in Sierra to use. Okay, just a couple of things about the layout of the screens. First of all, the major difference with Sierra versus Millennium is the fact that it's a unified client. That means we no longer have multiple modules for circulation, cataloging, serials, and acquisitions. Everything is available in one screen, and the way that you move from one function to the next is using this function drop-down menu in the upper right-hand corner and selecting that to move between one function to the next. So I can move between circulation, cataloging, acquisitions, and so forth. So that's how you would move. Instead of opening up a control bar and then moving between modules that way, you would just use the function drop-down. So that's one of the major differences between Sierra and Millennium. The file menu across the top here, where you see File, Edit, View, Go, Tools, Admin, Reports, and Help, that's pretty much the same as it is in Millennium. There's a few major differences, but first let's just take a look at some of the similarities. If you go to File, you'll notice that a lot of the options here are the same as in Millennium. You go to File, select Printer, Standard Printer. It shows you the exact same dialog box as you would see in Millennium. Almost everyone should have at least local printer and send to email. I think ours says email printer, something like that. But if you can verify at least that you have local printer and email printer, everyone should at least have those two. If not, we can make that change for you pretty easily. The major differences here are in this command menu at the top are the Go menu. A lot of macros or those function keys that we have set up for you are tied to specific macros that will open up, for example, circulation checkout desk or check-in or search holds mode. A lot of the function keys, for example, with circulation are tied to that. But because we have an extra level, everything's combined into one all-inclusive screen here. We have to amend those macros so that they work correctly for the function keys. So you have an extra step, for example, for circulation, where you have to put in Alt-U to go to circulation desk mode. Just one example, one of the changes here. This tools area, and like I believe in Millennium is the same, this will vary based on what options you have available in the function that you're in. So right now we're in catalog mode. But if I change this to the circulation desk mode and go back to tools here, my options here are quite a bit different than what I just saw before while in catalog mode. So they're a little function sensitive, I guess is what I'm saying here. The other option here that's a little different is this reports area. You'll notice that in Millennium there was in the bring it up here in the control bar, just bringing it up on the screen here. There is an option here for web management reports. I can find it here, yeah. Oh, the manual is here. But you can find the web management reports. These are the circulation reports. the old school ones that we have with the Java menus. And they're also a new version of circulation activity reports. These are just circ reports that are available here underneath this option as well. If you don't see this reports area, let me know and I can try to make some changes for you. Almost everyone should be able to see this now. We did have an issue with MPL staff not seeing this, so you may want to just check it out to make sure you can see that area. This is more of an issue for the branch libraries at MPL that need to see fund reports, and those are underneath the web management reports. And just a few brief words about the language changes here. They're just using different terms. You'll notice that everything on this list here has kind of a major heading here that's capitalized, for example, for serials, circulation. These correspond to those modules that we had in Millennium, and everything beneath them, serials, check-in, routing, claiming, those relate to those buttons that we had in Millennium. So you can kind of view those the same way. These are called functions, and these areas here in the bold type are called workflows. You may hear me use those words interchangeably, workflows, modules, buttons, modes, but it's all the same thing. You get the hang of it pretty quickly. And just to reiterate, all the modules and functions in Millennium have counterparts in Sierra. So everything that we see in Millennium, we should be able to work with in Sierra day one on April 2nd. If you're not seeing something, it may be that we just need to add it to your authorization or to your login. And one other important point, just so because you see something in this function list does not mean necessarily that you have access to it. So if I'm a circ aide or perhaps an intern of some sort, it does not mean that I'm going to be able to access Global Update. Global Update is a very high-level function that allows you to make a lot of changes to the database that are probably not going to end up well if you give it to everybody. So just so because you see it here does not mean you have access. Those are all regulated by your authorizations. And those are all coming over from Millennium. The same ones you have in Millennium are coming over into Sierra. Okay, and one of the last things I want to mention before we get into looking at the actual catalog is Sierra also means that we have no more locked or busy records. This is a function of this new PostgreSQL database that we're going to be using on April 2nd. So things like broken holds, in theory, should no longer exist after April 2nd. I'm hopeful that that's the case. Also means that e-commerce patrons will no longer have problems paying during backups or when their record is open on Millennium, which should be a nice thing for them. I've already noticed since we've moved over to the new server that issue has happened far less. It didn't really happen all that much to begin with, but I'm not seeing it at all, frankly, the last several weeks. Okay, so I'm going to move over to my catalog mode here. We're just going to take a real quick look at the search results before we get into creates list, so you see what you know what to expect. The indices that we're using in Millennium are going to come over to Sierra, the same ones that we're using. This test database has a little different view of the indexes that they have access to. Ours says periodical, but this, for the most part, is going to look the same as what you see here. I'm just going to do a title index search for Inferno. Click on search. And I wanted to just talk briefly about what you see here in the results display. The results look a little bit different than what you're used to in Millennium. And I'll show you, we have a couple options that we can use for your login if you want to use a different view. But their default view looks like this. Shows the indexed entry at the top so you can see why it actually appeared here. This might be an actual added title, for example. that's part of this record. That's why it appears here at the top. But beneath that, you will see the title. I believe this is probably the added title right here, author, and then locations. That's going to work pretty much the same way it does for us. In preview mode, you can actually see that right now. So this will give you the actual search result information. There are two new columns here on the far right-hand side. One is the summary that gives you the bib record number, whether or not there's at least one available copy on the record, and how many attached records there are. So for example, we see item here. We have in the second one item, 4 bib holds. Down further, you can see an order. There are no items attached to this one, but it gives you more information about the record right away. This last column over to the far right is preview, and that will show the book jacket once we're live. This will have to wait until after April 2nd. Apparently we can't get that in place until after our go live date. And one important area I wanted to point out was this icon here, the little eye. It shows you more information about the title without actually having to go into the full record. So you can see added title, author, edition, publication information, and so forth. It just gives you a little bit of a glimpse. You'll see these little icons with the eye in the middle all over Sierra, not only for bib records but also patron records. You can take a look at that. And that's actually something you can see in preview mode right now. But there is a different view that you can use. This is the default view for Sierra. I'm going to bring up a screenshot that I have that shows a little bit different view that's more similar to what we're currently using in Millennium. So if you look at Millennium right now, you will see the index entry results, and then whatever is indexed underneath that entry, whatever titles are indexed, will appear below underneath. Once you click on the plus button, you'll see all the entries appear below it. So if you prefer that view, there may be some that prefer that view of the index. We can certainly make that happen for you. That's totally a preference thing. It'll work the same either way. Regardless of which view you use, either the default or that more Millennium style view, which they call compact browse, you'll actually see in both cases this column on the far left-hand side that includes all the facets for the search. These facets match up similar to what we use in Encore and the new County Cat. It's a little bit stripped down version of it, but you'll see facets for format, language, locations, and availability for all the titles that appear in your search. And they work very much the same way as Encore. So if we wanted to limit our search to all titles available at Emeryville Public Library, we just double-click that area, and then it will limit the title result list to those titles available at that library. And by available, I mean owned by that library. I believe this is looking at the biblication code to determine that. And if I want to remove that, I just simply click on the X right next to it, and it gets us back to that original view. The only difference between this view and the one I just showed you is that this area here for, let's see if I can drag this over. You can drag this over if you want it as well. This phrase area actually matches up with those index entries that we saw over here, so that you can see it on the left-hand side here. That phrase area does not appear here because it's basically duplicating what you see here in the results screen. So that's just the major difference between the two as far as the facets go. If we go into a full record, we can just take a look here, just double-click on it. You'll see the summary view of the record. Looks very similar to what we're currently using in Millennium. The biggest difference being that the tabs that we normally had at the top of the frame here, the center frame, are no longer there. They're moved over to the side as buttons. So but I can still go between the summary view, an individual record, and looking at bib level holds. Put a hold on this record. But it looks virtually the same in terms of functionality goes. If I wanted to take a look at the item record, all that information will be here. You'll see this tab layout or this button layout on the left-hand side of the screen and all across Sierra. Patron records, order records, anything that used to be a tab in this view is now moved over to buttons here on the left-hand side. If we go click on Edit or View, this is the full record display, the MARC record in Sierra. This was created to look a lot more like OCLC. The shading here you see for these subfields like C, D, and D here in the 040, that can be customized. We don't have to have it there, but that's their default view. I believe that's the same way it looks right now in our layout of Sierra in a preview mode. All the codes that we use for mat type, cat flag, all that coding, the loan rules, everything is brought over and actually has been brought over already. And the major thing that they're going to be doing on April 2nd is to update that information, so any changes that have taken place will come over. But most of the database has already been seeded in Sierra. The bibliographic records and all attached records have been brought over. And that process of updating continues as we make changes in Millennium. That process of seeding the Sierra database takes place at virtually the same time. One of the major changes, it's not a major change, but it's a relatively small move, but in Millennium we often have a browse button that's in this list of buttons here at the top. That's now been moved over to the far left-hand side in Sierra. So if I want to go back to browse mode, you have to use this button here on the far left-hand side. And if I click it, then I go back to my search results. Now I'm in single window mode. A lot of people in cataloging acquisitions like to use multi-window mode, so you can have multiple records open at the same time. That's still available to us in Sierra, and it works virtually the same way. So if I'm in a record, so for example, if I bring this up again, I go back to browse in multiple window mode, it'll leave this window open and allow me to look at open up other records. So it works identically to Millennium in that sense. Okay, so that's just a real quick overview of what Sierra is going to look like as far as the database goes. Close this out. Regarding create lists, there's a couple ways you can find it. It turns up in a lot of workflows that we've set up. It turns up in circulation. These are all different. Cataloging, acquisitions. It'll turn up in a lot of different workflows that we have set up here in this drop-down. You can also find it underneath the Go menu. So if you go to Go, Administration, and Create Lists, it'll appear there as well. So there's a number of ways you can get access to it. So we go ahead and click on that. I'll bring it up. Before we actually get into looking at the list and creating a list, I wanted to show you one other area as far as settings go that we'd like you to check to see if this matches up with what you're used to. If you go to Admin Settings, this would be in Sierra. There are some options for create lists that you can look at. I mean, and they're very brief here, but I wanted to point them out. The default on our system and the most effective way to handle this options group is to select Do Not Wait for Searches to Complete. This is the default. Those of you who may be familiar with the old create lists in the blue screen realize that we used to have to wait for searches to complete for you to be able to reuse that terminal screen. So you'd be stuck there waiting for like a search to complete on the database, which may have taken maybe 4.5 to 5 hours at one point. That's no longer the case with both Millennium and Sierra. This allows you to create a search and then go to a different function within the same module or completely different area of Sierra or Millennium that you wanted to use. So anyway, just wanted to make sure that you have this one checked. It's going to be the default for virtually everybody, but it's probably worth checking in any case. The interface has changed a little bit with Create Lists and Sierra. As I mentioned before, those tabs that we had in Millennium, if I bring up my Millennium screen here, this is Millennium Create Lists. And you can see my file tabs for review files, save searches, sorts, lists, and exports are at the top of the screen here. If I go back to Sierra, there are now buttons here on the left-hand side of the screen, but they work in identically the same way. I think this layout actually is a little bit better in terms of just using more of the screen. I know this column's kind of unused here, but it just seems a little bit better in terms of organization. Just my personal opinion. Even though the tabs have been moved over, the buttons for searching, sorting, listing, exporting, showing records, and showing info are in the same place that they are in Millennium. Also, this drop-down, not a lot of people use this, but I want to point it out. You can use this drop-down to filter all of the lists by the status. So if you're looking for all those empty review files, you can use this drop-down, and it's in the same place that it is in Millennium, so nothing's really changed there. So it'll look very much the same. The number of review files, you'll notice that the list of review files here is fairly small. There's about 101 on their training server. For us, the number of lists that we have available will still remain the same. We'll have 360 review files available and about 300 saved queries. This might be actually a little bit larger for us, but all of that information, your queries, your exports, your lists, everything is being brought over into Sierra, into our preview mode. It's actually there already. It probably needs to be updated on April 2nd, but it will be. Okay, so the process of creating a list is going to look pretty much the same. There's really not much of a difference. If we go to click here, search records, I just wanted to show you this because this is something that we cannot do in our current preview mode. But I can give this file a review file name. I can change my stored record type to anything I'd like here. They have a lot more here. This is some of the things we just don't have access to because we don't use them. And I can choose my range, review file, index, or advanced, usually just range or review file. And then I can just enter in my search criteria just as I have within Millennium. It's virtually the same. There's really no difference. The areas that I do want to point out to you that are different are actually the fields that we have available to us within Create List that we don't have in Millennium. And a lot of this are related to patron information, but also orders, and I wanted to point those out. So if we go into patron, look at our stored record type of patron, and look at patron fields. If I double-click this field area, there's a couple areas I wanted to point out to you. One is we have a lot more options for searching on the patron address area. The name is going to be the same since we don't index or don't have commas in our patron name fields. Everything is indexed underneath the last name field in Sierra. So it's really not very useful, but you can still use last name to find patron by name if you wanted to do that. What is going to be most useful is the fact that you can now use the postal code for a zip code search. And I've actually used this in our preview mode, and it does seem to work. We use the browse query to do that. But you can search for a postal code and list those out. It seems to work pretty well as far as I could tell. And also the address city. So if you're looking for a particular city, you can use that also in Create Lists. This is not something that we had before. We only had address. And that wasn't very helpful because everything was kind of lumped together. So zip code and city, address city are going to be available to us in Sierra. The things I'm most excited about are these tabs here at the top. We have our regular data fields for the patron record, but we'll have two new tabs that you can search on. One is the holds area. So we're looking at patron records and holds attached to this patron record that we're searching on. So you can see if a patron has a frozen hold, when that hold was placed, the hold pickup location, when it expires. You can now search on all this information that we've never had access to. So I'm very excited about that because it's going to allow us to, for example, with stale holds, remove all those holds that are stale and that you would probably not want to consider for removal or addressing those in any way. We just remove them from the list and you don't have to worry about them anymore. So that will cut down on that significantly in terms of the number of holds that you have to consider with that list. But it just gives you an idea of what you can do with this. There's all kinds of applications with this particular group of fields that you could use. There's also a tab here for fines. So fines attached to this record, you could look at when the fine was assessed, the charge code, the fine paid date, the initials associated with the fine, all this granular type data that we have never had access to, you can now use in a Create List search. And everything associated with it, title, loan rule, anything you can think of here related to fines are listed here. This fine information is not only in the patron record, but you can also look at it from the item record perspective, and you can look at, search on items and grab the fine information off of the item side as well. The same goes with holds. The holds information you can actually look at when you're searching off of bib records, item records, or patron records, since their hold information is connected to all three of those distinct record groups. So for example, if we go change this to item, double click on the field area, you'll see the holds information appears here. So you'll be able to actually pull up, for example, if you have 30 bib holds on a particular title, or maybe 3 or 4 item holds on a particular record, you can actually show all the patrons that have that item on hold if you wanted to do that. Same goes with the fines. You can look at all the fine information associated with that item as well. So there's a lot of applications that are now open to us because of these additional fields that they've added to the records. Additionally, if we look underneath the order records, this may be just limited to a specific group of people, but I wanted to let you know that there are also new fields available underneath this area. So if we look at order, our stored record type is order, we're looking at order records. There are now additional fields for paid. So when an order was paid, the date, amount, invoice date, paid note, things like that you can actually look at now and do searches for, where as before in Millennium we did not have access to that. And you can also look at information for received, information on the location, copy, item, fund, volume, and date. So that's limited to a specific group of folks normally in acquisitions that would need to use that. Okay, so that's just a real quick look at the Create Lists area. I did also want to point out to you one area, one tool I think is going to be very useful for you, and that's underneath tools here. So I'll probably change my mode to see it. So I'm in catalog mode. You'll see this option here for a new tool called Browse Query. If I bring that up, it's usually available only in catalog mode or search holds mode. But you'll see it in most of your workflows. It will show up and you'll be able to access it. But if you look for catalog, go to catalog mode or search holds mode, you'll see it pop up there. It's underneath the tools menu. It uses the same search form and the granularity of create lists, and it uses that so you can return search results. So it's not creating a list, it's returning results into a browse screen or results list that you can then use to make changes. This is incredibly useful for items where you want to do a quick search for a field that's not indexed. And I'm thinking particularly of patron phone numbers or email addresses, or if you're doing bibliographic maintenance on notes, anything that you can think of, it uses that granularity of create lists, pulls it into a search result. So if we do, for example, a patron search, patron, let's see, it's not going to work. We're just doing a generic patron search for email address has gmail.com. If I have to do this in our current Millennium database, it would probably take about 10 minutes to bring up everybody that has gmail.com in the database. Now, granted, their database here on the training server is pretty small, so it's going to take up a split second for them to run this search. But if we do this, it just brings up the search results right in this window here, and I can take a look at this particular patron, make any changes. You can see their Gmail address is come up here. I can make any changes or edits I want and save it back, make my changes and save it, and close the window. You'll notice that my search results disappear if I close out. If I do that, a similar search, let's just do another one here for patron telephone. I was thinking this would be a great search for people who you need to find a telephone number in the database. You have a phone number, but you don't know who is it attached to. You can use this type of search to find that information very quickly. So, like if I'm causing problems with teleforms, you need to know what my number is, or who is attached to that number, then my record comes up right away, and you can see what my record is. Make some changes to this record, and then save it off. So that you can think of all these applications you can use for this browse tool query. I think it'll be very helpful. It's really not great for large result sets. If you're trying to search the entire database for really a lot of information, it's going to limit you to, I think, either 5,000 or 10,000 records to return. So it's not really good for large result sets. If you're trying to do something like that, you're probably better off using create lists. You can use it with existing searches, so if there are existing create list sessions, review files out there that you want to use the criteria from, you can pull that right into your browse query, which wouldn't be a problem at all. You can also retrieve a saved query, so if you do have a saved query here on the database, you can pull that in and then run your search really quickly. So we could have a number of canned searches, we already have them out there, that you could apply to a browse query and just run it real quickly and get your information. And that would just pull it into a results set. The only major issue with this is you can't save or export results. So if you want to export information out of a browse query, you're not going to have any luck. You have to think of it as an extension of your index fields when you need to find a specific piece of information like a phone number. But if you treat it that way, I think you'll find it's very useful. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the SQL queries. those of you who are not aware, one of the major selling points for Sierra was the ability to dig deep into the database and get data from their tables that they actually use to put Sierra together and grab information from those tables for reports that we could make on our own. That was one of the major selling points. It's put a lot of the movement is towards more openness with that type of data so that libraries and third-party vendors could use that information and kind of enhance our experience with the catalog. We will be allowing access to all tables within Sierra sometime this year, and so that we would offer training to those staff members that are interested in doing this type of work with the data, and then we would just require that you do the training first, and then we would open that access up to you. It's just based on your initials, so we would just apply that ability to access the SQL tables at that point. But this is something where you would want, for example, more granular data about your holdings, collection development. You can export a lot more fields from this than you ever can with Create Lists. So it expands our ability to get more information out of the database to a much greater extent. And we're probably looking at somewhere about mid-year, maybe a little bit later to start opening this up. There are a number of canned reports that we can develop, and we'll need to get all of that in place before we can do any kind of training. But it's going to happen sometime this year. Before I finish up here, I just wanted to mention that there are really no major known issues listed by Innovative with regard to Create Lists. However, I've had heard of 2 issues through the grapevine talking with other libraries that have implemented Sierra, and I just wanted to make you aware of these. These 2 may have been fixed already, but I just wanted to make sure you are aware of it. One is that the copying and review files may take longer than usual. So in Millennium, if we do a copy, take an empty review file, click on this copy function, you can copy one review file area to another. We usually don't use it much unless you're using it for example, ordering. If you've got vendor record orders, you'll copy it from this area and put it into your review file. Apparently that has taken longer for some folks. It may not be the case with us, but I wanted to make you aware of it. Also, creating a sublist off an existing review file may take a little bit longer than usual. An example of that would be if you're creating a sublist off of, just take a look at our Master No Circ 5-year list. This is what you would use to get a list of your own library records off of this, is to create a sublist. So you find an empty review file, and then type in, this is basically the sublist process is using a review file and searching off of your items. So like item, I like greater than today for some reason. So if Greenfield wanted to run a No Circ 5-year list, this is how they would do it. It would be creating a sublist off of that Master No Circ 5-year. So that process may take a little bit longer. I'm not sure how it's going to work for us. Hopefully, I will be raising this issue with them, but I'm hopeful that that will change by now. So that's really all I have in terms of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Please use the chat interface at the bottom, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. while you're typing, I just also wanted to remind you that we do have 2 more GoToMeeting sessions available, and these are open Q&A sessions that we're going to hold via GoToMeeting. Those are going to be on March 26th and 27th. And you can take a look at that Sierra sign-up training form that you used to sign up for this session to sign up for those if you're interested. This is kind of like a free-for-all in terms of questions, and the timing will be good because it's about a week before we go live. So if you are interested in attending that, that's also open. So if you don't think of something today, we can certainly address it later. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, but if there are things that come up, feel free to give me a call or an email, and I'll be happy to address it. Thanks a lot for your time today. I'm hopeful everything will go well on April 2nd, and we'll do our best to iron out whatever comes up. So thanks a lot, everybody, and have a great day.